So my name is William Wisner, and I am a member of the Board of Directors of Burn Pits 360 Veterans Organization. And our organization is dedicated to issues of military toxic exposure illnesses. I was an Iraq vet from 07-08. I started having my own symptoms, difficulty in breathing, primarily shortly after I returned. So probably around the end of 09, beginning of 2010, probably somewhere in that time frame. Pretty much typical stories, a lot of veterans that are familiar with it. What's going on, go to the VA, hey, all your tests are coming back normal, nothing wrong with you, it's in your head. You know, you have asthma, here's an inhaler. It's kind of the typical story. Burn pits are quite literally just a big pit in the ground that any and every thing imaginable that you might have as garbage that might come out of a military installation overseas would be thrown into this pit and covered in jet fuel and set on fire. And so that's everything from body parts to unexploded munitions and ordnance to vehicles that have been blown up by roadside bombs, paint cans, paper, medical waste, you name it. Iraq war lung that everybody seems to wrestle with, all the way down to the most bizarre cancers. I think that one of the most truly disturbing ones that I've seen is probably not a burn pit related itself, but it's certainly connected with that whole larger scope of what is a toxic exposure illness. That's the methylquine neurotoxicity. That one's especially bad. But I mean, pretty much if you can dream it up and it exists as a medical condition, it seems like it's probably on that registry somewhere. Oh no, it's a long list. I mean, you have the foam, fire retardant foam that the firefighters use, military service. That's pretty nasty. Contaminated groundwater at different installations stateside. A lot of bad news with that. Of course, Agent Orange. Going back to the Vietnam era folks, Gulf War illness, and all the multitude of things that could be wrapped up in that unexplained illness, everything from oil well fires to exposure to chemical munitions, depleted uranium rounds. I mean, you name it. It's a toxic soup bowl of things that are out there. Oh yeah, just within my circle of people that I'm aware of, I would say more people than not have at least some kind of respiratory issue that you could, the VA would call asthma or COPD. In my case, I've been upgraded from asthma to COPD as time has gone on. Most folks that that I served with seem to have something going on there with that respiratory tract. No, I think that most veterans are not aware that they're sick. What seems to be the trend is those that have the ability to go to that VA for help are generally shut down at that point. And I think, especially with the respiratory issues, if you're dealing in terms of like the constrictive bronchiolitis issue, which is going to come back normal on those initial assessment tests, the pulmonary function tests and all that, those are going to come back within the normal range, and that's where I think most veterans are shut down and they're told you have asthma and they accept it and move on. And so my guess would be that the vast majority of people that are impacted by this have no clue what it is that they're actually dealing with. Well, unfortunately, I think that by the time that most people are going to the extreme measures of tracking me down physically, and hey, I'm here in Detroit, would love to talk to you. I've got a son that has this issue. I just got into contact with family members from Burn Pits 360, and this is one thing's led to another, which led us to you. unfortunately, I would say my experience so far has been that when they're that motivated, they're in a pretty dire situation. And so that's unfortunately coming along oftentimes end of life time frame. There's not a lot of options left for folks. They're really getting desperate, and unfortunately they haven't made those connections earlier on, so they're playing catch up, and it's a very short window. The way it typically unfolds is soldier, airman, Marine, whatever, returns from deployment. They left a world-class athlete type physical condition. They come home, maybe they're unable to climb stairs. Maybe the next day they can run 2 miles with no issue. Then the next day after that, it's a struggle going, from one room to the other while carrying a light load, of a box or something like that. Whatever it is that triggers them, something's wrong. They go to the VA looking for help. That doctor goes through those initial assessments. The pulmonary function test is probably the very first thing they do. Those are going to come back in the normal range, because oftentimes this is an issue of oxygen diffusion instead of oxygen capacity within the lungs. And so, that's pretty much where that treatment ends, or at least the investigation into what needs to happen for treatment ends. And it comes back as, there's nothing wrong with you. Your tests are normal. If you persist and keep looking for answers, inevitably these folks are being labeled as having some kind of a conversion disorder, some other type of a mental illness. And so they're treated psychologically instead of physiologically. And, those pills are not going to address the physiological problems that they're having. And so when they go back for that second visit and say, hey, doc, these pills aren't having the effect that, I'm hoping, it seems to follow along a pattern of, before you really weren't sick, it was in your head, and you didn't really have these issues, and now you have these pills, and so what you're experiencing now is perhaps, side effects off these pills. So let's change your medication. So they change up the pills, and they go back to it, and still no impact. They still have the same issues they had when they first came in. So they go back to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, let's try changing it up again. So you get another round of pills, and when that doesn't help, and you go back for the third time, they say, okay, well, I see what's going on now. You're a pill seeker. And, on top of this, a lot of these, psychological problems that veterans are experiencing, I think some of this stuff is probably more of like in the case of mefloquine, I think, mefloquine neurotoxicity can mimic some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So I really definitely am curious as to how many people out there with they're living with post-traumatic stress are actually living with a toxic exposure illness. But anyhow, I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit. Back to the point of that spiral. Once you're in that being treated for that psychological, when you're in that realm of treatment, the physiological is being ignored, and you start to doubt, whether or not you actually are sick. Maybe you are crazy. Maybe it is in your head. Well, a lot of these guys have been told they have what's called a moral compass problem, where they've seen or done something that's so contrary to their sense of right and wrong that it shatters their psyche in some way, and it manifests these symptoms. So not only are they crazy, but it's their own fault. They did it to themselves because they're a bad person. And then on top of that, now they're a dirty pill seeker. And if they're married with a family, and if this is impacting their job or ability to earn money and produce for their family, that's just that much more weight. And there's that spouse that's, hearing, hey, you're a crazy, bad ethics individual that's seeking pills. And that, when money issues get tight, it can really impact things. And, before long, the marriage falls apart, and the spouse takes the kids and goes, and there, that veteran's sitting there wondering, what they're going to do. And, maybe they move back in with their parents, or they do what they have to do. The self-esteem continues to spiral. They still feel like nobody's listening and there's no help. Well, at that point, is it really any wonder that, so many of them choose to end their life? It seems like it's the only option. So I think part of that 22 veterans a day that kill themselves number that everybody's become so familiar with that phrase, how many of those folks are in that position because they're trapped in this little personal hell? of dealing with this issue that has no good path that's part of it. No, I don't think that. I would say it is the exception rather than the rule. I would say most are not. I know that through the course of work we've done with Burn Pits 360, the environmental coordinators that are at these VAs regionally, they're the folks that are supposed to be, the resource that you're to contact if you need to set up an appointment for, looking into toxic exposure illnesses. And what we found through our work is that a lot of these people that are in that position, they're not equipped to deal with it. Many times they don't even know the first thing about it. They're surprised that that's their role. So yeah, I would say that would certainly qualify as not optimal care. The best thing they can do is equip themselves with the knowledge to give their medical professional that's responsible for them. So the VA actually produced a letter that's available on our website, burnpits360.org. We call it the 10-3 letter. It's actually a letter that goes over considerations for healthcare providers for people that have been potentially exposed to whatever wartime, toxic agents. And having a physical copy of that when you go to see, a doctor for the first time, or a specialist for the first time, or you're just getting new care in that system, giving them that memo can prove helpful, because it gives them. It can jump over a lot of that "there's nothing wrong with you" stuff. That, hey, maybe this is worth looking into and giving some weight, with considerations. I think that's probably the most effective thing that you can do. All right, thanks. Happy to be here.